Right, okay, good evening, no lady. And I really did want Anne, lady, good evening. I really did want Anne to see this, put her right off. I'm going to start this a little bit backwards with this and see where we get to. Some of you have known me, Tom in particular, since Methuselah was a lad, but Tom is younger than me. And Morse literally has changed my life in the sense that I had a Morse key before I knew what Morse was. At the age of 12, I'd just gone to Clare Hall Secondary School, and I was messing around with wire. Well, in fact, before that, I was from about 11, wire and bells and buzzers and things. And much to my clever older brother, we're now friends, who built things from Hobbies Weekly, he was interested in the wood, and I was interested in the technical bits that F.G. Rea did there. And my brother got terribly annoyed when I could fix his model boat radio and build my own transmitter and interfere with the television, and he hadn't a clue. I also fixed his crystal set, which was in a beautiful oak box that he'd made, and he'd used black Japan screws and twisted the wire around, and of course they were all insulated. So that was my early start. But I bought this Morse key with a friend, Alan G3TQA. We're at school together, and we discovered Morse. Around about the same time, we discovered the Northern Heights Amateur Radio Club, which began in 1961. And we were about 13, and we discovered it, and we discovered you could get a license to transmit as far as Heckmondwike and or Bradford on a fine day. And we found out that you had to have a Morse test as well as an exam, the level of which was, you'd call that AS level, between ordinary and advanced. We were too young to go to the technical college, so we went as guests. And every week we had a different name for somebody that didn't turn up. So the register kept the RE code. So all through the winter we did it. But of course the problem was the international requirement to learn Morse. And you had to learn Morse and you had to pass it. There were only 2 Morse tests a year in Bradford, and they were mass Morse tests, mass receiving and individual sending. My peer group, we were all taught very loosely by Mary Shaw, G3OMM, Old Madam Morse, and she lived in King Cross Lane, but we were left to our own devices, and no tape recorders, HFC Morse records, ex-military Morse records were a bit financially out of the way. The only thing we really had was this, and this is the Margaret Mills Morse book. Now, the international Morse test that you had to pass in order to get a license, there was no B license, no VHF, nothing. The length of the test, there were 36 words, and the duration was 3 minutes. You were allowed a maximum of 4 errors, but no uncorrected errors. So in other words, you could go through it afterwards and correct them if you could guess the words. You then had to do figures, 10 groups of 5 figures for a duration of 1.5 minutes, and you were allowed two mistakes. And you were allowed 2 mistakes, and you didn't have to do any corrections. So that was it. Now that is just totally unrealistic for holding a Morse conversation. But we had Shakespearean quotes to send. That way the noise is, tyrant, show thy face. If thou best slain, with no stroke of mine, my wife and children's ghost will haunt me still. I cannot Right, so that's what you were doing. My friends managed to pass by hook or by crook, and you can pass this around and have a look at it. I failed, and I failed miserably, and I threw it all in the air and I gave up. I'd found girls. I'd found that they liked a DJ. I'd found that they even liked a DJ that could play the guitar even better. I left school because I was no great shakes. And I'd been promised a radio and television apprenticeship, but when I got there, he'd given it to somebody else. And my father sent me to be a carpenter's apprentice. But after 6 weeks of having chisels and hammers and told to go under the bandsaw and clean it out while they switched it on, and getting a haircut, that was the end of it for me. And I got a job in a radio and television shop as a junior salesman, but even that didn't work. And I became an export clerk for Riley's chocolate toffee rolls. And I saw all these wonderful places that they shipped tins of toffees, and they had wonderful, you got them for Christmas, and they had beautiful pictures on the front. I thought, I'd like to go there. What can I do? How can I get out of this smoky old town? And it was Morse code. So Morse code began to change my life, and I went to, I blagged my way on the strength of a City and Guilds certificate in electronics, otherwise known as the RE, into college with no maths at all, avoid maths, and I left school to avoid maths, and I managed to do it in 18 months and do a radar test, and it changed my life. I spent 5 years at sea. I did things I thought I'd never do. Flew to America on British Overseas Airways, BOAC, on a Comet. It took forever. And I saw Apollo 11 go to the moon. I was the last chief radio officer on the original Queen Elizabeth. I worked in oceanographic research. I met Jacques Cousteau and his son. I worked and lived in Monte Carlo. It was very boring. Certainly, after you'd done a bit of on the research ship Discovery, you got a bit bored with it, and that was it. And of course, I think the rest you probably know. I came ashore. I did work for Farnell's. I worked with Stono Radio Telephones. I started my own amateur radio shop. Went to mobile radio, mobile phones, etc., etc. But it all stemmed from that Morse key. That Morse key that I bought in Bruce Mitchell's in Pelham Lane for 10 shillings and sixpence. So it's okay saying that it changed my life, but where did it all begin? Well, we know about Samuel Morse, don't we? We've all heard of the guy. But who was he? I was told long ago he was an itinerant painter that had a quick idea and with a few daubs on the end of edge of his canvas when he was painting. Someone else describing as similar to Hitler, a house painter, and that was about it. But in pulling this together, I've done some more research, and that is not true at all. We don't know a lot about Samuel Morse. Samuel, in that sense, most radio amateurs don't. He was highly intelligent. He was very well connected. He was a celebrated artist. He moved in political circles, and it was a case of, it's a bit like Steve Jobs, the right place at the right time. I wish Donald Trump had been somewhere else. This is Samuel Morse, and this is him, aged 22. That is age whenever, and this is the man. And you can see he's quite a dandy. He's there in his regalia from Yale University. Not only was he, interesting thing, have you noticed his middle initials, FB? FB, which stands in Morse for fine business. So he's Samuel Fine Business Morse. Right, that really took me. Right, this is who he is. He's a descendant of Anthony Morse from Marlborough in Wiltshire. He's English. And his father was Jedediah. Wonderful. Jedediah Morse. Now, Jedediah Morse was a Calvinist preacher. If you think of the right wing of the Protestants, and then think a little further right, and go a little further beyond that, you get somewhere near Jedediah Morse. So you can see that he brought his son up in that vein. He studied religious philosophy. Well, I suppose it came easy to him. He'd had it drummed into him, but of course it would be Calvinistic. We don't like the Catholics, and we're not bothered so much about slavery. Maths and science. He studied that at Yale, and he was awarded what they call the Phi Beta Kappa, the highest honor you can get from a US university. That is some going. And as we know, he's a painter and inventor. He started painting without any real tuition, I think, and became reasonably good. But he was picked up by a famous artist who was part of the American, what they call them. I didn't know the word this afternoon. We had Byron and Shelley, and they were part of that lot, but the American version. Washington Alliston took a shine to his paintings and persuaded Jedediah to let him travel to Europe. So he traveled to Europe, and he spent 3 years in Europe, mostly in this country. He was admitted to the Royal Academy of Arts, so you're not all bad when you get into there. Now he traveled to Europe. He studied Leonardo da Vinci. He studied Michelangelo. He studied life drawing, and he was very good. And I'll just hold on to this at the bottom. When he went back to America, he became the professor of painting and sculpture at the University of New York, because one of the tricks he learned about painting in Europe was to make a model, to do sculpture first and to work from, because they didn't have cameras and selfies. These are some of his paintings. This is his masterpiece, The Dying Hercules, and you can see that he's obviously studied anatomical life drawing. If I can find my pointer. He's around at the time of federalism in America. Shall we get the states together? Shall we not? Leave the southern states to their own. This is John Adams, one of the founding fathers of the United States of America, a signatory to the Declaration of Independence. So he got to paint him. And this is Monroe, the 5th president of the USA. And this is another of his masterpieces, which we can't really do justice in here. But this is the Salon of the Louvre Museum, the art museum in Paris. And he's mimicked all of the pictures that he could see. Now that takes some doing. He might have been a good artist, but he never made any money. There were better people around him at the time, but as I say, he was well connected. But he continued his interest in science, and he met when he was in this country. He met Faraday, and got on well with Faraday, and he also discovered Mr. Wheatstone, the Wheatstone Bridge. And so he took all this knowledge with him back when he went to America. So now he's moving in high circles, as we can see. And he didn't invent the telegraph, because we have to deal with the telegraph, because this is where Morse comes in. He was about 5 years behind the telegraph. It was the railways that wanted telegraph. And these two men, Sir Charles Wheatstone, as you can see on the right, this was the money man and the mouth. They formed a company, and Wheatstone knew about electromagnetism, and they devised two electromagnets and a needle like a compass, and they had a 2-wire system, if you like, stop and go for a train, or yes and no, and they developed this and patented it in this country for a very short distance of railway. But as we all know, if you attach a battery to a long length of wire, if you've got 12 volts to start with, you don't necessarily have 12 volts at the other end. So this was the problem. It was useless for long distances. it could do a couple of miles and that was about it. You needed another operator 2 miles away to actually look at the needles and then start all over again. And this is what they were doing. Now, the Americans, of course, it's a much bigger country and the much longer distances. And the government offered a $30,000 prize for somebody who could make a telegraph work over a longer distance. And Morse took what he knew. He took what he knew, and he'd met Wheatstone, and he was thinking this problem through. But I ask you to remember that he's at he's at University of New York as a professor, and this man, Leonard Gale, is the professor of chemistry, and he had a personal friend called Joseph Henry. Does that ring a bell? It should do, because he invented the electric doorbell. He also gave his name to the SI unit and inductance. He'd got inductance working, but he became friends with Samuel F. Fine Business Morse, and they looked at this problem of the distance, and he was looking at this problem with distance, and they were looking at this electromagnetism, and he discovered self-inductance there was mutual inductance and the self-inductance, which is slightly different. And he opened Henry's eyes to that, but he never got any credit for it, really. But Joseph Henry invented the relay. So, ringing bells again in his head, this is the relay system. You're making operators redundant. It's the first case of redundancy in electronics down the railway line. And of course, you send it from here, you get to here, and you trigger the next stage. By this time, he was employing a man called Alfred Vail. Now, you get lots of famous people like Edison, but the man that did the real work was Tesla. You get Boyle and Boyle's law, but the man that did the real work was Robert Hooke. And so this continues. You need to bounce these ideas off other people. Robert Hooke became more famous than Boyle in the end. This is a picture. This is not George Washington, although he has the pose. This is Morse. And over on the right is a receiver, which we'll talk about again. And what was going on here was they set up a trial veil in an ironworks, and they managed to wind what we would say was 3.2 kilometers of wire around this ironworks, because they're long and they're thin and the hot iron ore shoots down, and they got 3.2, and then they passed a message. Now it's fairly common to know that the first public message that was sent by Morse is what Hathgoth wrote. But there is a previous message, and it said, "A patient waiter is no sloth." And that's what they sent in that mill. So taking the fact that he could make it work, he went back through his contacts to Congress. And he set up a test between two rooms in Congress and showed that you could actually send a message and you could repeat a message. And he got himself $30,000 for the privilege. I should have gone back there, I think. But $30,000 for the privilege. And I've lost some of the writing, unfortunately, in the translation of this, that some of the writing was there. And he set up a line between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. It took quite a long time because they bought cheap wire and it kept breaking. But after about 2 or 3 years, I think we're talking about 1844 now, he managed to get this thing to work just in time for some presidential results to be sent from New York to Baltimore. So the whole thing is fascinating. Now, what did he do? How did he make this work? Well, this is the original Morse sender, and it works with what we'd call punch tape. And this is a clockwork motor that's wound up with a counterweight, and it's driving forward paper, right? And here he's using Wheatstone's invention of the solenoid from this here, and these are his contacts, to punch small indents into the paper, which you then have to read back. There is no Morse key at this stage. Vail came up with this, and it goes left and right, and it goes dots and dashes left and right, and it's a very slow process to drop this stylus and make this imprint. What I found interesting was this. These are the two dies, and this is, to this day, this is the spacing and length of Morse. You recognize it, Max? That's the standard one dot. The space actually is equal to that one dot, and a dash is equal to the length of 3 dots. So when he moved this on these rollers backwards and forwards, he's got a weight there, look. This is how he indented the paper. And on that previous picture I showed you, he was standing in front of a Morse receiver, and the Morse receiver was doing a very similar job. Clockwork again, paper again, and as the thing was fed through, it stamped the paper. Right, so let's go. Now we get to Mr. Wheatstone takes up this idea, and this is a Morse perforator. A clockwork again, solenoids again, and that's I like this. It's a drawer with a spare roll of paper. This one I have physically seen. I've physically seen this in the Royal Signals Museum. And this was a way of pre-preparing a Morse message, because somebody had to set it up to pre-prepare this Morse message. And I don't think it's on the next slide, so I'll just tell you. I was absolutely staggered when I discovered that the British in the Crimean War laid a 390-mile undersea cable from Varna in Bulgaria to over to Crimea, and they were laying lines in the desert and all the rest of it, and reports of the fighting in Crimea were sent down this cable into Bulgaria, and then over land cables to the British, and printed in the Times newspaper. William Rushton, I think, was the reporter, and it was that inspired Florence Nightingale to set up the nursing that we know. So Morse had an influence. He's having an influence everywhere. People are running these telegraphs. They made the cables in the desert. They didn't really have enough rubber or anything like that, and they used gutta percha. Gutta percha is a plant, and it's a rubber-like thing, but rats love it. So they had as many men from the Royal Engineers, because there were no Royal Signals then, Royal Engineers mending it every day when the rats had been at it. But we got the message. Over on the right, because it was really big on the railways, of course, and we've all seen American cowboy films. Well, they're not the genre these days, are they? They're not Mission Impossible. They go into the telegraph office, and the guy's got the visor on, and all you can hear is a click, click, click. You think, nah, that can't be right. Yes, it is right, because his little solenoid is stamping this plate, and this is the forerunner of the loudspeaker. This is from Australian Railways. It's in a museum, but very, very similar. Sometimes these things were just standing on an open box to amplify the signal. We've no microphones, we've no speakers, nothing. And the operators became, I mean, if that's all you did all your life, all day long, you began to recognize the clicks as well as on the bits of paper, and you didn't need the bits of paper anymore, and the clicks would sound the Morse to you. It was like Max was saying, instant recognition in your brain. It's not a case of dot, dot, dash, dot, dot, dot on a piece of paper. It's da-di-da. And it's like that. So they began to recognize that. The first Morse keys that we would recognize, this is in 1905. We're now getting to the era of the spark gap transmitter. And these are called camelbacks. And camelbacks had two things. Camelbacks give you leverage without sort of stressing the bar. They gave you leverage. And can you imagine your hand round that? And there's a sender, look, and it's got a sounder built onto it, solenoid sender and sounder. That's a current thing. I include this camelback key here because this is very, very reminiscent of things in World War II, particularly the Americans. Thousands of these were produced because, you know, military hardware's throw away, isn't it? I want you to notice that and the one on the far end there. They are switches, and they're the equivalent of what I built into this of my design, and Max has one apparently to this day. You notice it's not on the first one, 1905, but by the time you get to valve transmitters, you have to go key down to resonate and tune to an antenna, and unless you're going to put a brick on the key, you've no control. So this was exactly the same for me at sea. You'll see this is a switch on there, key down, tune up the transmitter. These days, you put the key down, the auto tuner goes and you're away. Right, okay. So actually, what is a key? It has contacts, it has a tension return spring, it has a pivot, and it has a gap. It is nothing more than a switch. There's your gap. There's your return spring, which is compressed and bounces back. And this controls the gap here. So you can screw that up or down, and you have the counter effect on the other end. The pivot. Now the pivot on some keys like that J134, the American thing, wear. Cheap keys have no bearings in there. But this is all a key is. It's essentially nothing more than a switch. But there are some wonderful switches. There are as many of these switches as there are grains of sand on the seashore, and they're all magic. This is the key that I bought for 10 shillings and sixpence. You wouldn't buy that today now. I think they go for about 40 quid on eBay. I don't have it. This is one I had to plagiarize from eBay. But it's the same idea. There's your tension. There's your pivot. It doesn't mean it can stand 8 amps of current. It's AMP. It's the manufacturer. I always wondered about that. I believe they were made in Canada, and they were made by the thousands for the World War II, and there are 100 variants of it. So I hesitate to say Chinese copies, but there are lots of them around. But that's enough to get you started with Morse. Who invented the bug key, and what the heck is a bug key? Well, it was Horace Martin in 1905. I showed you, I said keys are beginning to appear. Now, Horace Martin founded the Vibraplex company, which, as it says up there, is still in business. There are 2 Vibraplex keys for you to look at. That one there, that one's the 100th anniversary number 100 key from the RSGB. It really should be at Bletchley, but I've got it. It's mine. It's not the best key I own. And he came up with this bug trademark, which stuck. He patented the key, but it was vastly copied. I'm still discovering names of people that actually copied the idea. I did start writing some down, but I ran out of paper. It's called a bug key, but it's a semi-automatic key. We still have the same basics, only now they've changed. They've changed. The gap is being controlled from here. This is the pivot has gone vertical, and it's a needle point. And however, the actual strength of the action is controlled by that screw there. The turning action is controlled, and the gap is controlled here, not at the far end like it was before. And this is rigid. But on the end of it, this is rigid up to here. This is spring steel. And one way, it comes up against a contact, which is joined to these two here, which is a manual dash. In other words, it's a manual switch. But when it goes the other way, this piece of spring steel comes up against another piece of steel, which is acting like a pushback spring. And this rod vibrates just like a pendulum. And the rate at which it vibrates is controlled by a counterweight, just like a clock. And this controls the speed of the dots. Now, when you actually go back to rest, which is in the middle, no key, this thing's still going like that. There's a dampener here, and it's just a disc. So when it vibrates 5 or 6 dots, so when it goes over, it vibrates whilst it's traveling, and it gets damped when it gets to there. So that's how the and of course you can still plug it in to the same transmitter. And the man that made a mint out of this goes by the name, apart from the inventor, is Theodore Roosevelt McElroy. The reason he's called that is he was born the day after the morning after Theodore Roosevelt, the cowboy president, was elected, and his parents were fans. I wonder how many Donald J. Trumps there are. Right. Okay. Right. McElroy was self-taught telegraphist. He was 12 when he begged a job with Western Union. He actually didn't get a job taking the messages that had been received till he was 14. And he didn't become a telegraphist till he was 19. But he taught himself to touch type when he was 11. Now you imagine taking Morse down on what I call a sit-up and beg typewriter. See? Because he was typing out the messages. That he went into the Western Union office and said, I can type. And then we said, go back to school. But of course, children left school at 14 anyway. My father did. I don't know why, but he did. So he could touch type. And he married the idea of touch typing with the Morse coming in on the clicker. Now that's going some. And this is Theodore Roosevelt. I love saying this. Theodore Roosevelt McElroy. And he only died in 1963, which to someone like me is not long ago, because I left school in 1963, age 15. And he was a bit of a Barnum and Bailey type. He was a bit of a show-off. He was that good at it. He formed his own company, and to promote his own company, he entered competitions, Morse competitions in various states. There were Morse competitions in the States, and there was a national championship, and there was a world championship, and he won the blooming lot, time and time again. So they gave up. This is his. The army were the examiners, and they had a funny scale called the 18-point scale, I don't know what I haven't had time to delve into that. 18-point scale, but he was receiving and typing Morse at 88 words a minute. Now, he was so good that they changed the scale to 12-point, which took him down to 73.5 words a minute, but he was still way above any of these flash Harrys that you'll hear on 20 meters. And he was taking it all down, and he could recite to you what he'd received. This is one of his keys. He started a company, and that's a semi-automatic bug key. It's called a pearl drop. And just as a reminder, this one came from a Pan Am transcontinental aeroplane. And that's how we got the idea for the pearl drop aeroplane, because everything was all about aeronautics. Because, of course, planes had wireless operators on passenger liners way back in the 30s. So I have a great affection for Theodore and R. McElroy. And his company produced bug keys. Now, one of the people that taught me Morse was a man called Jack Bateman, and he lived at Queensbury. And in order to get him to send me any Morse, I had to walk to town in Halifax in the winter, catch a bus to Queensbury, get off at the traffic lights in the hail and the snow, walk half a mile up the Denham Gate Road, knock on his door, go in, wait till his string quartet had finished practicing in the lounge. He would then deign to give me 40 minutes. And then I never got a cup of tea, and then I had to come out and go all the way back again. But I have a great affection for Jack, and he had a McElroy key, and he had a very, very early one, which I inherited when he died. And it's copper bronze, and it's of a design that was not around for very long. Unfortunately, in his dotage, he tried to modify it, and he cut one of the bars. I think he was attempting to make a paddle key to do dots and dashes, and he got it wrong. He cut the wrong bit. I have it in pieces in a lovely mahogany box, and I've tried to find, this is a bit missing. This is a standard issue Marconi America marine key by Theodore Ernest McElroy. It cost me over 200 quid and about the same kind of money to get it to the UK. And the thing about McElroy there, I love all that on the base. But I love all that advertising on the base. And it's incredibly heavy. But when they started to make it, has the same bar. Much thinner, standard in steel. But it gives me the distance of the pieces that are missing. And I need somebody that can cast copper bronze. I've been told it's copper bronze. And I will, God willing, I will get that key back together. I actually don't like bug keys. I don't like bug keys because the dots come too fast. You can tell one when you hear it. And it puts me right off when I hear one. But for the sake of Jack, G6BX, it's my life's work. I was going to go down to Bicester Motion and because they make parts for cars, but they've had a big fire at Bicester Motion down in Bicester. Of course, I said there are as many keys as there are grains of sand, and these are just some of them. The Swedish key, so called because its handle is one of the longest, is there, and it's my favourite from all the time I had at sea. This was a standard Marconi issue 365, and I'd like one purely for nostalgia, but you'd be paying over 250 quid for one of those. I was lucky to get this. If these come up for under 100, it's the best key you'll ever buy. It doesn't have bearings. If you notice, there's a bearing race in there and one on the other side. That's why it's so good and doesn't wear. But it's very heavy, and they're screwed down to the table when you're at sea. So when the ship goes up and the ship goes down and you go that way, you go with the table, the transmitter, the chair, and the Morse key, and it doesn't slide away. This is a flame-proof key. If you're in an aeroplane with a load of, in the war, being shot at, or on a submarine where there's lots of vapor around, you don't want a spark. to kill everybody, basically. Notice how it goes around. It's compact for use in a small space, and the lever handle goes round. Weird and wacky keys. This is a vertical bug key. Guy's name's Weston Smith, I think it is, and it's a standard key. But there it is again. Look, there's a speed bar. There's the dampener. You can see it a lot better there. I'd like one of these. This is a British-made key by the Eddystone Company. It's pretty crude inside, but it's made like a scarab beetle. It's a bug key. They only ever made 350 with serial numbers. Most of them are chipped off like this or have been repainted. This is actually quite good condition. But because there are so few of them, it annoys me that I haven't got one. And I would condescend to use a bug key occasionally if I had an Eddystone bug. They did make another batch by popular demand later, but there were no serial numbers on them. So I would like one of the 350. Modern keys don't use springs. We talked about the springs. Modern keys and paddles, particularly those made by Pietro Bagali, who I've had the pleasure of buying a key from in person, the return and the pressure is done by magnets either side or above and below, whichever you like. So the tension is controlled much more finely, and there is nothing to wear. It's just they're just stationary magnets, but it gives a beautiful smooth action to a key. And now, of course, they're becoming works of art, because I now believe that Morse code is a bit of an art form anyway now. It's not essential. It's an art form. Art is defined as something made for its own sake and no other purpose than to be what it is. So when you're not using them, they're pieces of art. And Bagali, of course, engraves his keys. And as I say, I've got a Bagali sculpture here, which cost me an arm and a leg. I've also got another. Who's had it? This is a clever little key. This is magnetic, this base, so it will stand. If you sort of double-side stick some metal to your bench, it won't move. This is the base unit, and Aircraft make their own key that plugs in directly into the KX3, but it's a bit of a rough and ready key for sustained length. So Mr. Bagali made his own with an adapter, and it goes on there. So again, as I say, it's a paddle key, but it's a beautiful little object, magnetic, again on both sides, and it screws onto there, and it's a dream to use, like all Bagali keys are. But there are dozens of makers. Nike, the Japanese are quite good at making keys, and they are some earlier. High Mound are amongst the best of the bunch. If you can find one on a marble base like that, an HK702, grab it. Nice smooth action. It has bearings and springs. It's conventional, but it's a very nice key. You'll also see it. It's the same key, just not chromed. That's the same key, 705. I think it's a 705. 708. It's for sending slow-mos. Those were made by the 100 for the British Army. People to sort of practice, do their homework on. When we get to 1948, we're going off the idea of a straight key, and we're coming into this idea of paddles, which are just two switches side by side. So you've one needs to generate dots, and one needs to generate dashes. They still need return springs. They need pivots. Look at that. That is a piece of work and a half. That is an electronic keyer, and it generates a stream of dots and a stream of dashes and you switch them with your switches to the output. It probably consumes half the national grid to drive it, but it's there. And this is known as a speed keyer. These are commercial items made. They're really something, aren't they? I've never seen that one before today. Was it KE1X? I don't think it's made by Ellicraft, by the way. That's a KX1. No, it's not. It's KX3. Sorry. By the 70s, the Japanese are getting in on the act because they were just decimating my favourite maker, KW, left, right, and centre, and they high mound. There's people like Katsumi and Igout and Kempro were making electronic keys. This one is interesting. This is very first key, because you can switch it from automatic. I know if you notice, it's a single paddle. And single paddle because you can go to semi-automatic mode. Let it do dots and do your dashes manually if that's what you're used to. But now you've got away from this pendulum that actually speeds up the dots as the vibration stops. You've got regular dots. Again, I didn't get on too well with this. But you can learn to use the paddle by using it in a semi-automatic mode. And then when you're feeling brave, you go to automatic mode. One thing you can do, and one thing I did quite a lot, in the early days, was with a semi-automatic key. I can't really show you this. Is that you start off great with the key, see, and you're doing okay, and then you suddenly get confused, and there's too many dots are coming out, and it's gone. So you just turn the key on its side and just send dashes, because all it is a switch until you recover, and that's what you can do. And I always advise people when they're trying to learn to use a paddle, which ultimately is much better because you can send for longer, you can send quicker, and it's less stressful, says he. Over time, it's less tiring, should be the word. We're beginning to get to transistorization and the memory keyer. But we've gone to transistorization, and this is a kit. This is a very early Kanga kit. We're using almost discrete components. We're using chips. We're using TTL logic, and we're making keyers. But so don't worry, we're coming to the end. This man, why is this man here? This man is Jack Curtis, K6 KU. He's no longer with us, and his brilliant idea was, can't we put all these dots and dashes on a chip? And the 8033 Curtis chip was born, and all these used it. It was very expensive because it was a private venture to have these made. And to get a Curtis keyer chip was very expensive. MFJ seemed to have quite an input to that. I think they had money, and that's an MFJ keyer, and it has a Curtis chip in it. A lot of QRP has got hold of Curtis chips for self-building, and we have Jack Curtis to thank for that. So it was an amateur invention, and now, of course, it was developed further by Oxford University, 8044 and further on. And now, of course, it's standard fare in any transceiver. And that's from Jack Curtis. This is an MFJ. What an ugly looking thing that is. And of course, we then get into memory chips. And you can store preload messages from the key. That is, incidentally, is a bencher key. I nearly brought one. Because I have a bencher key, just the key itself, which is a radial thing. But it was too heavy and the box was full. And I got that at a silent key auction, the bencher key, and it was owned by an amateur before me, and who had the wonderful call sign of G3DOT. Isn't that wonderful? So there we are. That's a Japanese Ken Pro. And that, I think, is a Katsumi. Again, a memory keyer. So Morse changed the world, and it changed my life. Doing a post office Morse test does not equip you for sending or receiving Morse. Have you decoded it yet, Max? It's thanks, Samuel, for your fine business code. 73s and many thanks from G3UGF. End of message. End of message finally. And that is the end of that. Oh yes, or BT and all that. Yeah, yeah. It depends how fast you send it and where the space is. Morse may have disappeared as a legal requirement, but I actually, from struggling beginnings, I've taught a lot of people Morse. And it was when I made the connection that Max talked about, it's all about recognizing the sound. And it was, you hear it, it goes in, you think it, you make that connection. The problem we had was learning dots and dashes and keeping a code thing in your pocket and translating car numbers. Nobody told me to do da-di-da. It was dash dot dash. And that's what took me so long to learn that it was da-di-da, and it was the sound of it. But of course, the Morse code test, we also had to write it down. So you had to translate what you'd heard into your arm and onto the paper. I quickly recognized that there were no prizes for spaces. You just had to meet that requirement that I said earlier, these 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So I went back to how I learned to do real writing with tails and starts. And I let the words find themselves. So when the Marine Surveyor at Liverpool on the third time go around, because you could go once a month there, but you say you'd only got 2 choices. But it took me a month to save up the money to get for the train fare or pay Mike Fisher for his petrol. I just literally never took my hand off the page. Then I went back and put stroke signs between the words and handed it to him. His key was a Marconi, well, it wasn't a 365. It was so hard to pump. He walked out the room. I thought he was very callous. He walked out the room. I couldn't get up to the 12 words a minute. So the third time, I said, I want to use my key. He said, well, it's screwed down, it's wired in. But I beat him because I'd taken a lead. It was a key identical to this one. This is an RAF key. They're hard to find because the Bakelite goes. This one's been repaired, and Bakelite collectors want them. They know nothing about Morse, but they want. I've never bothered with this much, but they're a very good key. And I had wired mine with 2 crocodile clips, and I put them across his key. I was livid, and I flashed away at 14 words a minute. And he said, I suppose you better have his certificate. And that changed my life. Thank you very much.
We really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Don't forget to check the video description where you'll find additional information about the video you've just watched, along with links to products used and to the Haddai's website. If you enjoyed this presentation, please feel free to hit that like button. Maybe you'd also consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell so we can let you know the next time we release another video. Thanks again for watching.